Okay, so hi everyone and welcome to Stats and Chats. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be starting at the panel in just a few minutes, but before we start, I want to very briefly introduce myself and also the census as it is as a project. So just before we do start, this event is being recorded, so if you do want to view it later, it will be available later on the website for you to catch up. And if you do want to tweet about the event, you can use the hashtag 2020 Space Census. So, my name's Heidi Tiemann. I'm one of the directors of the Space Skills Alliance. I'll soon be passing you across to a wonderful panel who will be talking about the results of the 2020 Space Census. But as a brief overview, if you're not quite familiar with what the census was and what the aims were, let me just tell you about it. So we know that in the space sector, there's some existing evidence which suggests that there isn't a great amount of diversity and inclusion in the sector. And there are some issues specifically around gender and ethnicity. But previously to the 2020 space census, this evidence has been limited. So without a good baseline of data, it's quite hard to determine how we can make interventions, what interventions should be made, and to identify what interventions are actually successful in increasing diversity inclusion in the space sector. So our goal with carrying out the 2020 space census was to collect this baseline demographic data, and this can be used down the line to feed into national policy and space sector strategy and to improve the sector for all. So what we're presenting today, and this is a report that we actually released last week, was the results of the first kind of demographic set, so purely the protected characteristics of people who responded to the census. We will be releasing further reports throughout the year, which will cover certain aspects of the census in a bit more detail. For example, women in the space sector, or for the experiences of LGBTQ plus people in the space sector, as well as routes in and out of the sector as well. So I'm going to pass over to Anya and Joseph, Craig and Yvette, who will be talking about the space census. I'm going to mute myself and I hope you enjoy the rest of the session. Thanks.
Thanks, Heidi. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Anya. I'm a planetary science PhD student at the University of Glasgow, but I'm also the diversity officer for the Royal Astronomical Society. For those who might know her, I'm the maternity leave cover for Dr. Sheila Kanani. And that's kind of my capacity that I'm here today. So in a second, I'm going to ask Craig, Yvette and Joseph to introduce themselves, but I'm also going to ask them what the space census means to them. So while I give them some time to think about this, I'd like to start just from my own perspective by saying how great this data set is. Gosh, it's been a long time coming to have something like this. I was so thrilled to be invited to chair this chat because shockingly, I just really love good graphs, especially those presenting really meaningful diversity data in such an accessible, clear way. Honestly, it's just lovely. If you haven't looked at the graphs yet, you really ought to. Joseph and Heidi spent so much time making them and they're just, yeah, so powerful. So for me, it's really, really useful and powerful to have this comparison data set as a kind of benchmark for the sector. And yeah, I'm just really excited to deep dive into it with you wonderful people today to sort of work out what it all means. So I guess it would make sense to start with Joseph as the co-director of the Alliance. What does this mean to you? Tell me, what's the context here?
I like you, Anya, I'm a bit of a stats nerd. For me, it's been an incredibly exciting opportunity to get lots of data about the space sector that we've just not had before. This first report is really just the tip of the iceberg. You know, we collected so much data from all the responses to loads and loads of questions well beyond just the demographic stuff, that we actually broke the tool we were using to analyze the data. We had too many pivot tables; it couldn't take it anymore, and so we had to be careful about what it was we were going to analyze. So for me, it's an incredibly exciting opportunity to better understand the sector and to start thinking about what meaningful changes we can make based on these baseline demographics that we've just not had before.
Fabulous, thank you. Yvette, would you like to introduce yourself, your background, and what it means for you to be here today and to have this data set?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Yvette Hopkins. I'm currently an executive vice president at the Shetland Space Center, first vertical launch, yay. But really, you'll note by my accent that I was a 30-year military intelligence officer in the US Army. And so I'm really delighted to be here. I'm very pleased that you guys asked me to be a part of this and excited to be a part of this. So, you know, to your question about, you know, after reading the report, you know, I think the thing that really came to my mind is, you know, we have an opportunity here. We all talk the talk about, you know, spaces for everyone, spaces for good, that we need to be inclusive. We are relatively young here in terms of our space sector. So we have an opportunity, particularly after reading this report, we have an opportunity to upfront ensure that the culture that we build is the right one that we want to see for ourselves. So I'm really excited about the opportunity, not only with this, but hopefully going forward. So Joe says that he's a data nerd. I'm an action nerd. So we can sit and we can churn over all this data and go, whoa, you know, that was shocking. But in the end, what I really hope is that we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to get to work. So thank you very much for inviting me.
That's awesome, Yvette, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you think these actions should be and sort of discussing that as a team this afternoon. So that's wonderful. Okay, Craig, at you, introduce yourself and let us know, what does this mean to you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Craig Brown, Vice President for Major Programs at a company called SatixFy. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years, and before that I was Innovation Lead for Space at Innovate UK, so the UK government's innovation agency. And my involvement within the kind of diversity topic really started when I was working in that government agency and was trying to kind of understand the kind of barriers to growth in the UK sector, UK space sector. So my job was to grow the UK space economy. We were putting lots of money into small businesses and big businesses and expecting them to kind of grow their workforce. And it was clear that there was an underlying problem with skills. So I did a fair amount of work on the skills topic with UK Space Agency as well. And of course, the diversity piece within that kind of skills topic is also super important when you're trying to kind of maximize the kind of potential of the space sector, or of any sector actually, but of course we were coming at it from the perspective of growing the space sector. So that was really the start of my interest, you know, beyond the fact that it's, you know, it's the right thing to be doing, should we say, morally and ethically. It's actually a really important thing for the growth of our sector to be able to capture all of that skills and talent. And let's be honest, kind of grow the sector at the pace at which the sector wants to grow at. I mean, at the moment, if you look at the number of job openings across the sector, it's huge, you know, and the number of people that we are training up isn't enough to kind of fill the kind of job openings that there are. So it's important that we address diversity as part of that skills topic to be able to ensure that we grow at the pace that we need to grow at. What does it mean to me personally? Well, I mean, you know, it's really glad to hear Yvette say that, you know, she wants to see action on the back of this data, because so I was invited by UK Space and the UK Space Agency to be the diversity champion for the space skills group. That is a collaboration between government, industry, academia, and so I said I will take that job only if you allow me to do something proactive and practical. I'm not joining a talking shop, you know, I want to do something real, and I can promise Yvette that this is just the very first stage of something that will be very real and very practical. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing, thank you. This is just a wonderful bunch of people to be chatting to, and I'm very excited. So let's start with the data side with Joseph. You've been staring at these numbers for weeks now, probably dreaming about them if I know you well enough. So aside from the adverts for vaping products, what were you most surprised to see in the data set when you got it, and why was that?
So I think that one of the most surprising ones for me was around ethnic diversity. So we've known for a long time that the space sector, just when you look around a room at something like the UK Space Conference, you get an idea of the mix of people who are there, and we know that there are issues within the sort of larger skills pipeline right the way from school through to joining the industry around gender diversity and ethnic diversity and so on. But for me, the most surprising one was the ethnic diversity figures, particularly for Black people, because there are quite a lot of Black graduates who kind of fit the profile of working in the space sector, so doing physics or engineering or computer science. And yet we're not seeing those in the youngest cohort within the census results. We had no Black respondents at all in the 18 to 24 bracket. And when you compare that to the situation for women, where about a third of STEM graduates are women, and about a third of people within the sector are women, it tells a very different story, that there doesn't seem to be so much of an issue with recruiting women. It's more an issue of the availability of those graduates, whereas for Black people in particular, there's clearly some major problem that we need to address there.
And do you have any ideas of how? Just a small question
Well,
there for you.
how to address it? I don't know. I mean, this is something where we need to talk to the people who are affected by this. So one of the things we have got that we haven't made use of yet is one of the questions on the census. Right at the end, we said, would you like to be contacted for follow-up conversations? So now that we kind of know what questions we want to ask, we are going to be having those follow-up conversations. So we will be trying to talk to some of the small number of Black people within the sector and other groups as well, to better understand their experiences. We're also planning later on in the year, as I say, we've got all of this data still to analyze, but one of the things we haven't looked at yet is we had a question around experiences of discrimination. So it may be that's part of the course. So we're still trying to understand a bit more of the issue before we can say what kind of action should be taken. But we're really keen to hear from people who have had those experiences and are experts in that area. Yeah,
and I just think that's so great. Like, you're absolutely right. We can't make decisions on behalf of people that we're not, of people whose experiences we don't have. And I think that's so important. So the fact you're doing these, hoping to do these follow-up conversations, I think is wonderful. So let's go on to our action there then. Yvette, do you have any ideas beyond these follow-up conversations? What thoughts do you have? You can think out of the box here. If you could start afresh, if you were in charge of the whole sector, what would you do?
Yeah, so actually, I want to go back a little bit. So, and I want to kind of riff a little bit on what Joseph said about, the sort of some of the shocking, or maybe other people don't think they're shocking, but for me, I thought there was some surprising statistics here. And for those, an opportunity to actually read the survey, I would recommend that you download it, read it. It's a very short, but very precise and punctual read. And what Joseph is talking about is the fact that there really was, both in gender and ethnic diversity, some interesting numbers. So for example, for women, and I know we'll get onto this, for women, what I thought was very interesting is that, number one, women are severely underrepresented. But within that number, a third of the women, it's only a third of the women in the space sector are actually British. So you import your gender diversity in the United Kingdom. And the same goes with ethnic diversity, that severely underrepresented in the Black community, overrepresented in the Asian community. But regardless, you import your diversity. So the flip side of that coin is that when it comes to sort of the shocking numbers, I think I was surprised as a little bit of an outsider. And that is, so your space sector is white, old, male, rich. That's who you are, and if you know, or we are rather. So so I'm going to answer your question now, Anya, and say there's absolutely no way to answer that question in terms of what are the practicalities, because while the census or while the survey is phenomenal, and hats off to you guys for even starting this baseline survey, there's so much more to pick apart. There's so much to discuss, as Joseph brought up, about the feeder system, and you know, what are all the different nuances on that, before you can really, you know, before you solve a problem, you really got to correctly identify it. And then I would say, you know, there are entire nations trying to figure out their, you know, their shit, excuse my language. So it'll take a lot more than that. But here's the exciting part. The exciting part is because the UK space sector is so new that we have an opportunity now, unlike other industries that start a little late in the game, you know, and we have an opportunity to not allow the, you know, stale mail and whatever the terminology is, to set the conditions for what the culture of the space sector will be. Sorry, that was long-winded, but
no, fabulous. Don't apologize at all. I could listen to you speak all day. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's a bit already sort of discussion in the chat, which is wonderful. There's a question about like asking if Black people are applying for roles. I guess one thing that's interesting there is in the data set, you did compare the sort of Black STEM graduates, if I'm right, Joseph, was it something like 6% of Black STEM graduates are Black, but we had none in the 18 to 24 workforce, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So we made a rough estimate. So we know from the census the range of degrees that people within the sector have. And we then looked at data from UCAT and the Higher Education Statistical Authority at who those, for that subject, who those graduates are. So looking at gender, looking at ethnicity, and so on, and tried to get a bit of an estimate. You know, it's never going to be perfect, you know, unless every single space company is saying exactly who's applied for their jobs. You know, we're never going to have that perfect picture, but it's to get an estimate of how big is the pool of people that space companies could recruit from. And you'll see within that, you know, there are some sizable error bars on that, because it is a very hand-wavy figure, but it gives you a bit of an estimate for what might be a reasonable expectation given the current state of STEM education.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, it's a brilliant way to do it. I think the interesting question posed in the chat is, are they applying for the jobs? Are we putting them off from even applying as a sector, or are they not getting in? And maybe that's something something for you folks to follow up with when you do your interview. So really interesting already. Craig, I want to ask you, how did you feel about the data? What was there anything that stood out to you most, that shocked you most, or even opposite? Was there anything you were not surprised by?
So much interesting stuff to pick through. You know, it's such a wealth of data. So I would say, firstly, it was a confirmation of a lot of our views. As Joseph said, you know, you go to a space event and you can kind of get a feel for the lack of diversity, generally speaking, with the grand exception, I would say, of a UK SEDS event. So, you know, you go to a UK SEDS event, it's a very different demographic to some of the kind of bigger events that happen. So there was confirmation really in the statistics that, you know, there is quite a large underrepresentation of many groups. One of the surprises to me, and a pleasant surprise actually, was that there isn't necessarily an underrepresentation of people from the LGBT community, right? So that's really good news. It shows that people from that community aren't put off from having a job within the space sector. Great. However, the flip side of that is that it's quite sad to see that a significant proportion of the people who are in the LGBT community do not feel that they are comfortable being open about their sexuality in the workplace. So that is clearly an issue for that community, which shouldn't be overlooked on the basis that the community is well represented within the space sector. There are still jobs to be done. They're slightly different to, say, getting some Black people into the space sector, but still there are jobs to be done for people in the LGBT community. So that's one thing. The other thing I thought that was really interesting was some of the work done around age. And I thought, you know, one of the things that kind of really made me worried when thinking about the growth of the space sector was this idea that there's this kind of cliff edge where there are lots and lots of people who are about to retire any minute, and we're going to suddenly kind of lose all of the kind of main experience within the space sector, and we're going to be left, you know, with a hollowed out workforce that doesn't have that kind of wealth of experience. And this, the survey results here seem to suggest that that is not the case in the UK, despite the fact that an international study that was done suggested that that was the case around the world, right? So whatever we've been doing over the last 5 years, maybe 10 years to kind of address some of those issues around bringing young people into the space sector has been quite successful. And so we've started to kind of backfill, I think, some of the early careers with fresh blood to kind of keep our space sector growing and invigorated. And so that was a really, really nice surprise from the data.
Hey, can I ask a quick question? Because I picked up on the same thing, Craig, having lived through the U.S. military's "don't ask, don't tell," you know, and what that did to my gay brothers and sisters in our military was really a travesty. So I was pleased to see, along with you, that LGBTQ and potentially our transgender community feels, you know, is represented within the space sector. But there was this little micro piece there that I thought was interesting, and that's that they're open about talking about their sexuality, except for the engineers. What's up with the engineers? And did you have any insight on that? Or just like, well, everybody can talk except engineers?
I'll give you an anecdote, right? So I'm gay. I came out when I was at university. I came out quite late in my university life, so in my final year, and was determined that I was going to go into my first job and be an out and proud gay man in the space sector. My first job was with the European Space Agency. Lucky me, I went to live out in the Netherlands for a couple of years where I did a traineeship. On my first day, I met my cohort, lots of young people from around Europe, really lovely people. And one of my first conversations was with a girl who became a very good friend of mine. And she said, you know, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a girlfriend? And I said, no, I'm gay, I said. And she looked surprised, shocked that I would say it. And she said, I'm fine with that, but for goodness sake, don't tell anybody that you're gay, because that will kill your career, right? And this was kind of in the early 2000s, you know, it's not a million years ago. But that single moment kind of changed my entire kind of approach to being out within my career. And it took me a very, very long time to kind of come out to anybody else within my time at the space agency. Probably didn't tell another person for about 9 months after that kind of friendly bit of advice. And she was giving me advice as far as she was concerned. But that moment has kind of really colored my experience throughout my career. And even today, you know, I often kind of kick myself because I'm asked, you know, what did you do this weekend? And I say, oh, not much, rather than say, you know, went for a walk around the park with my boyfriend. You know, it's just the kind of filtering that you do as an individual from quite kind of benign questions is something that kind of, you know, happens on a daily basis.
At least you have a boyfriend.
Good for the lockdown, for sure.
It's really, really amazing of you to share a story like that, Craig. And I think I speak for most people here that that's just how awful to have experienced that in your first day as a professional in the sector, and how wonderful that you've become this trailblazer of advocating for better, basically. And yeah, just massive thanks for telling us that story and sharing with us. It's funny, it was one of the things I'd actually written down that I was going to ask you how you felt when you saw that the LGBTQ+ people were kind of well represented. So it was nice that my notes had didn't even need to write it in the end. But yeah, anyway, as we've said, that the LGBTQ plus community is quite well represented in the census, but we've had a mention in the chat about people with disabilities and how it seems they're quite significantly underrepresented from what we'd expect. I don't know, Joseph, have you had any insights from your many pivot tables and breaking the stats there as to why that might be, or what needs to be looked at there?
So the disability stats are a tricky one, especially when we're comparing to, say, the UK workforce at large, or to other technology workforces, because disability is a very broad term. You know, there are lots of different kinds of disability, and they can affect people in different ways. And so it's quite hard, for example, to compare, looking at specific kinds of disability, the numbers of people in the wider workforce with, say, a vision disability, because the questions aren't asked consistently. So a particular thing for us was trying to ask that in a consistent way that's going to be the same as what will be in the UK census, and we're only a few days away from that. So the key thing,
UK, but not Scotland.
Yes, sorry, not Scotland, not Scotland. Yours is next year. So one of the key things we found with the disability stats was that mental health came up a lot, particularly among young people, and within that, young women. This ties into broader trends that young people are more concerned of, aware about their mental health, but it's clearly an issue that we need to be aware of as a sector, not least because there's also evidence that it's an underreported disability. So, you know, it's hard to hide if you're in a wheelchair, but you're in a wheelchair. You know, that's very obvious to anyone. But mental health, you know, you've got to speak up about it for it to be something that is recorded. So the fact that so many people did mention this, I think, is a bit of a warning sign for us as a sector. We don't yet know, you know, the details of whether that's caused by work-life balance and that sort of thing within the sector. Again, that's something we want to get more into. Yeah, disability is a very complex one, and I'm sure that there is more that can be done to make the sector more welcoming. We know that things like flexible working, for example, is particularly valued by people with disabilities. Yeah,
I do always kind of wonder, as everyone is right now, is what will the world come back to after COVID? And you know, I really do hope that these sort of flexible arrangements will continue for a lot of, if not all of the sector, because if you've been shown you can work from home, and if that's your preference, then I don't see why that shouldn't happen. And I know from friends of mine with disabilities and things that really has aided them, things like being able to participate in conferences that they were never able to go to because of travel, or you know, whatever reason, just being on your feet all the time, things like that. Maybe there's going to be an improvement there. Who knows? We'll see what happens. So I'm interested in terms of where do we go from here in terms of the data? What does it provide for the sector? Like what's, I guess, I mean, maybe I'll go with Craig on this, having that sort of almost government industry interconnection background, for want of a better word. I'm not the most articulate person, but is it a benchmark? Is it a comparison? Do we use it as a stop the white manners at every event?
No, it's absolutely a benchmark. It's something from which we can measure our progress against, right? So this isn't, you know, this isn't a kind of a process with which we can beat ourselves up or beat other people up. You know, this is just a reality check. It's kind of, it is what it is. We are where we are, right? So this is the purpose of the survey, but also to kind of start to inform us about perhaps some of the problems, or give us some insight, should I say, into some of the issues that we assumed were there, right? We could have run ahead and kind of started deciding to kind of tell businesses that they should be, you know, hosting LGBT lunches, or what, you know, we could have come up with lots of different kind of little things that people, that businesses and government departments and universities could have done. But there would have been no way to say whether or not any of those things would have been effective. And so it was absolutely fundamental that we established a benchmark. I'd like to say that, you know, a special thanks to the University of Leicester who funded the work. I think, you know, that was really, really appreciated. I would also like to say that it cost next to nothing to do this, right? It's been, you know, okay, a lot of blood, sweat and tears from our friends at Space Skills. You know, they've put a huge amount of effort into this. But you know, the number of people that have come to the UK Space Agency to me saying, you know, this is a brilliant bit of work. You know, I can't believe that you're so far ahead. You're light years ahead of our sector doing this. Like it's taken us almost no time to do, and it's cost us almost no money. So the idea that kind of everybody, you know, why isn't everybody doing this just to kind of get a feel for where they are in terms of the diversity of their sector? I don't know. So the next step really of this on the path is that we're going to kind of engage with all of the different kind of diversity in STEM groups. So, you know, we're not starting from scratch, or we're not, you know, as a group of people who've come together as a committee, we're not kind of reinventing wheels. You know, there are a lot of people who've been spending a lot of time and effort on kind of thinking about these issues. So we want to reach out to those groups to make sure that their voices are heard, and we include their kind of expertise in the interventions that we design. We want to kind of make sure that we don't kind of prioritize one group over another. This is something that all groups, you know, all interventions should be done in parallel, right? If we did everything in series, then it would take us forever, and we get nowhere very quickly. But you know, hopefully within the next, I would say 12 months, maybe sooner, we'll be able to kind of pull together a number of recommendations that we can put out into the world that people can follow. We'll ask them to do that. Maybe we can twist arms, and maybe perhaps there'll be a bit of a discussion about kind of what we can do to incentivize some of these changes within the organizations that we want to work with. But yeah, I see this as a very practical first step in a practical journey.
Absolutely, thank you. There's been a bit of chat in the chat about learning from other sectors, and it kind of builds on something that Yvette, you mentioned about it being, we're quite a new sector, but it's a point has been made that, you know, that there's the tech field, which is new in a lot of ways, many parts of it, but clearly they haven't got it right. There's a, you know, a serious, particularly maybe gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic problem there. So what do you see? Are there any lessons to be learned? What can we do differently to kind of drive this forward? That, you know, there's obviously things we've got to change and improve.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And you know, I don't have all the answers. You know, all the smart folks, not, you know, that are credentialed, but also, you know, all the listeners that, you know, people have phenomenal ideas. But I think there's a couple of things, and that's, you're absolutely right. We should take lessons learned. Well, actually, let me back up. You know, to your point, Craig, this is for us the first inaugural survey, and my hope is that it will continue to go, not every 5 years, but you know, you've got to start to get the data now. So I don't know if this is an annual occurrence, or, you know, particularly if it costs pennies, you know, that it should be done on a very frequent level, so that we're capturing the data and understanding where our problem sets are, but also where we reinforce success, right? Then I think there's obviously, as you pointed out, there's formal and informal ways to do things, right? And we can learn, we can get lots of lessons learned. And I would be curious if there's been a comparative analysis done with other space sectors, you know, other countries. You know, I think I saw somebody in the chat room, somebody said Germany does it better. I don't know what the comment was related to, but, you know, this is why we're in this unique position in time and space, because you know, we have an opportunity to learn from others, everybody else's mistakes, and move out smartly. One of the things I would say though is, as Craig was talking about very formal constructs, there is informal constructs that can already be happening, everything from networking, et cetera, et cetera. But As anybody that knows me, I'm a huge proponent for leadership. I will always talk about leadership when given an opportunity. So there's got to be a leadership component to this that's critically important, not only from a formal perspective, UK Space Agency, this should be in the hands of, all the folks that are out there day in and day out, in webinars and talking, and they should be bringing this data across the entire sector. And they at the leadership level should be saying, hey, you, Mr. Minister, or hey, Mrs. whatever, in this country, what are you doing that's better? And let me bring that back to the team, right? And then there's also at the industry level, so I have a responsibility and everybody in this room has a responsibility, and the leadership has to be intentional in this. It can't be like, we can't be passive. There's somebody famous out there who said, be the change you wish to see in the world, right? And so if we want to see an inclusive space is for everybody, then we've got to be able to walk the walk, talk the talk. We've got to have these data points. We've got to be able to ask questions at all the different levels so that, everybody becomes a part of this. So what I'd say is leaders really have a pivotal role in this. And when I say leaders, I'm talking student leaders, I'm talking kid leaders, I'm talking leaders, I'm talking everybody across the spectrum. When you have a platform, you have a voice that you have to talk about it. And then, as I said before, you really got to roll up the sleeves. I'm relatively new to the sector. So I am wildly, I'll be the first to say, I really mean what I say. I'd love to be a part of any potential heading this off at the path. You see the path we're headed on, and we got to head it off at the path and create the culture. So I'm absolutely happy to do that, as I know many other people are. And we've got to make sure it's not, it is, part of this is, I joke around, but it is, the old white rich guys that are running the sector, they have to be part of the change, so
yeah,
I don't know if that's helpful.
Absolutely. And that was for me, actually, a super shocking statistic was the percentage of privately educated and grammar school educated as well, people who in the sector. Like, to me, that's kind of a travesty, particularly as I understand it, there wasn't really an age thing. I'm conscious of time. I'm also conscious of, in 3 minutes time, I'm chairing another panel for ESRO. So I want to hand over to Joseph to kind of tie it together, but I want to end it with, what was your vision for this, Joseph? What's coming next? What exciting pivot tables are we looking forward to seeing the results of next? And yeah, where do we go from here?
Thank you very much, Anya. You do a fantastic job of chairing. So yeah, what comes next? Well, as I say, there's more reports that we will be publishing later in the year, looking more specifically at particular groups, what experiences they have had, and what can be done to address those issues. We've also ourselves as the Space Skills Alliance, we have done some research looking at things like job adverts, because we know that recruitment is a big issue, and looking at things like the language on adverts and the way those adverts are written. And there's a mountain of evidence out there. And we talked earlier about what can be learned from other sectors. And I think somebody in the chat mentioned things like the tech sector, where they have had similar problems. They're slightly, I think the space sector is kind of a slightly later version of the tech sector, similar kind of skills, similar demographics and so on, but we can avoid their mistakes. So there's some great work being done now about making the tech sector more inclusive, and I think we should steal every idea that we can get. So there's great stuff around mentoring and boot camps that specifically target underrepresented groups, improved hiring. So as I say, with job adverts, making sure there's not gendered language on there, moving away from the days of sort of, oh, we want a tech guru, which puts a lot of people off, making sure that benefits are suitable for everybody. So not the kind of Silicon Valley, you get a ping pong table to play with at lunchtime, but thinking about parental leave, which is going to get more women into the sector, looking at what we talked about earlier, flexible working, which we know is valued by women, we know is valued by disabled people. So there's a lot there for us to take advantage of, to avoid reinventing the wheel. And there are lots of expert groups who are crying out for someone to listen to them. And I think it's our job as a sector to listen to those views and try and implement what we can. So thank you very much for joining us. Anya has had to dash off to another event, the Esra Mars Day for school students. There will be more events in this series as we publish other reports. And if you're interested in those, you can head over to our website, spaceskills.org, and sign up for our newsletter there. You can also follow us on Twitter and on LinkedIn if you're interested in that. If you have any questions that weren't addressed, I know that several people submitted them in advance, and there are some in the chat as well. Then we will try to address those. We haven't had a chance, unfortunately. This is quite a short event to cover them all today, but we will try and address them either by email or in future reports. And if you have any other feedback about the report or about the event, we would love to hear it. So before I let you escape to your inevitable next Zoom meeting, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Yvette and Craig, to Anya, who I will thank separately, for joining us for this event, and for everyone who's come along as well. The recording will be made available, and it will be put up on the website. And please do share it with anyone you think should be reading it.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you very much.